The kingdom erupts in celebration after the fall of the demon general Sirius. The entire nation turns out to welcome their saviors home in triumph. A royal emissary, an elf named Sophia, offers the kingdom's formal gratitude. After a war spanning 15 centuries, the hero Alfred kneels before them. But one observer in the crowd sees not a wise sage but a simple fool. Alfred looks up, declaring that a true hero must never stop smiling. A lesson she herself taught him, to be the unwavering hope for the masses. Because, as she now believes, she is the true fool in this story. Later, the adoring crowd asks their hero just how strong his opponent was, and our boy just casually brushes it off like it was a Tuesday. The crowd roars, declaring him a hero unlike any who came before. But far from the celebration, a lone figure receives news of a fallen warrior. The news spreads in disbelief. They thought a hero named Kyle was invincible. Alfred simply smiles, remembering his fallen comrade as a true hero. The royal emissary, Sophia, appears to remind him of his duties. They journey to a hidden room where the observer from the crowd awaits them. She greets Alfred warmly, telling him she prayed for his safe return. She thanks Sophia for the escort, then reminds Alfred she is his student. Our boy just sighs because having a disciple 1,000 years older is awkward. But her smile falters, questioning why he's acting so strangely. The hero's mask shatters, and Alfred finally weeps for his fallen friend Kyle. His disciple watches, admitting she too is struggling to accept the news. She gently guides him to a seat, urging him to rest for a moment. Sophia prepares a drink, her magic infusing it with a calming essence. She explains this is the one place where a hero is permitted to shed his tears. Seated in silence, his student finally asks him to speak about what happened. She needs to know what drove a certain girl to become the key to a demon's revival. The story begins in the cursed Xerolus forest, where they were discovered. A young girl dressed in strange clothes was found barely clinging to life. The elf who found her recognized her at once as a Marabito, a rare one. The story begins 6 months ago with the girl lost and confused. She saw things that shouldn't exist, like mages soaring through the sky, and the taxidermied heads of beasts that belonged only in fantasy. The elf who found her explained she was 1,000 years old. She tried to explain the history and culture of this strange new world. And finally, the girl, Sano, accepted this was not a dream. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Most Marabito question their sanity, a common and predictable reaction. And just like the others, she eventually got comfortable enough to pinch an elf. But Sano would soon prove to be different from all who came before. Sano pours a drink, trying to ground herself in this impossible new reality. She attempts to rationalize it all as a delusion brought on by extreme stress. But her elven guide, Sophia, knows this is no dream. Sano concludes that if she can't tell what's real, she'll just have to observe. And then, she makes a surprisingly formal request of the 1,000-year-old elf. She asks Sophia to please look after her until she can find her footing. Sophia explains the kingdom protects Marabito, but there are conditions. When asked if she's a doctor, Sano simply smiles and clarifies her true profession. The story shifts to her first session with none other than the hero Alfred. And he begins his tale by speaking of his childhood friend, Kyle. Sano listens intently, recalling his words from the celebration. Alfred admits with a heavy heart that there was no archer better than Kyle. His disciple finally begins to understand the depth of their connection. He reveals it was he who recommended Kyle for the hero's party. It was his own selfish desire to defeat the demon lord that sealed his friend's fate. The memory takes him back to their youth, calling out his friend's name. He'd asked with a confident grin if he could truly defeat the demon lord. We see them in action, a 2-man army against a horde of demonic beasts. Alfred laid out their future. He would be the hero, and Kyle his trusted archer. But Kyle just scoffs, questioning who exactly is supposed to handle the small fry. Kyle warns him against the path of a hero, reminding him they all die in battle. Back in the present, Sano quietly agrees that his friend was right. Alfred's confession finally spills out, blaming himself for his friend's death. She simply acknowledges his pain, understanding the weight of his words. His disciple watches from the doorway, knowing this is the only place he can be vulnerable. She understands that in matters of the heart, she has no place to interfere. She tells Alfred not to dwell on it, reminding him this was the path he chose. But the hero remains slumped in his chair, the guilt still crushing him. Sano observes the exchange, piecing together their long and complicated history. She begins to understand the true cost of being a hero for 1,000 years. The disciple watches on, slightly startled by the formal proceedings. She apologizes for intruding, knowing these sessions are meant to be private. Sano calmly notes Alfred's core belief, that he is to blame for Kyle's death. For Alfred, this isn't a feeling of guilt, it is an undeniable truth. Sano doesn't argue, simply acknowledging his perspective. She admits that in his shoes, she would likely feel the exact same way. Her simple empathy seems to break through his wall of grief, if only for a second. The disciple realizes Sano's approach, while seemingly detached, is deliberate. She knows that no amount of denial from others can erase a person's guilt. The only way to help is to share the burden, easing the loneliness of his pain. This is the work of a clinical psychologist, to observe, analyze, and heal. The disciple sees that what looks like a simple chat is actually a precise art. Sano employs empathic understanding, trying to see the world through his pain. Alfred finally says it aloud, his own faith in his friend is what got him killed. She offers no judgment, only unconditional acceptance of his truth. He stares into his cup, declaring himself unworthy of the title of hero. Sano calmly asks him a simple question. Why? She then reminds him of his historic victory against the demon general. Sano is meticulously applying the core principles of her craft to guide him. Alfred looks up, her words finally piercing through his wall of despair. He looks up with a wry smile, apologizing to Sano for his outburst. Alfred admits he must seem pathetic, but says he feels a little better now. But she doesn't see him that way. Her listening is a professional, calculated act. Because what was truly saving Alfred's heart wasn't simple sympathy. She tells him that in this room, he doesn't have to pretend to be strong. Here, he is not the legendary hero. He is simply Alfred. And everything said between these walls is protected by a sacred vow. A vow of confidentiality, which Sano takes with the utmost seriousness. She once had a client confess to murder, a secret she took to the grave. It is this pride that allows her to accept the hero's burden of suffering. Alfred explains that the demon general's flames could only be blocked by magic. Sano listens intently, absorbing every detail of the final battle. He clenches his fist, recalling how they fought from inside a protective barrier. In a flashback, he admits that swordsmen like him were useless in that fight. Their mage was completely occupied maintaining the barrier to keep them alive. This left only one person capable of actually attacking the general, Kyle. The enemy was on another level, and if the barrier broke, they were all dead. So Alfred resolved to leave the barrier for a suicidal all-or-nothing strike. He remembers telling Kyle to cover him and to run if the worst happened. But his friend saw right through the plan, asking if he intended to die. But Kyle didn't try to stop him. He simply asked Alfred to trust him. The mage's barrier, it turned out, could be moved from the inside. With his resolve hardened, Alfred gripped his sword for the final charge. He burst from the barrier, covered by the volley of Kyle's arrows. Alfred carved a path through the demonic horde, a one-man army. His eyes were locked on a single target, the demon general, Sirius. But in the chaos of the final clash, his consciousness faded to black. He tells Sano that when he finally woke up, the battle was already over, because the one who truly defeated Sirius was his friend, Kyle. He explains the king decided it was better for morale to credit the living hero. Sano's eyes widen as the shocking truth of the story clicks into place. Alfred avoids her gaze, the weight of the lie heavy on his shoulders. He asks her not to look at him with such pity in her eyes. He grits his teeth, admitting he can never get used to this false praise. He reveals the truth. Kyle was shot in the back after Alfred passed out. Sano remains silent, letting the devastating confession hang in the air. Everyone called it a misfire, but Alfred knew it was something more. From the side, Sophia listens in, her expression unreadable. He explains Kyle had always given his own victories to Alfred for the people's sake. The king even ordered him not to speak of Kyle's death to protect public morale. Alfred explains that for years Kyle willingly lived in his shadow. He finally voices the question that has tormented him. Did he hate me for it? The hero's face is a portrait of pure, unfiltered anguish. From the doorway, his disciple continues her silent, somber vigil. Sano absorbs his confession with a calm, unwavering gaze. Then she reveals a shocking truth. She was also Kyle's counselor. She tells a stunned Alfred that his friend often spoke of him in their sessions. He can't believe it, questioning why Kyle would ever talk about him. But Sano refuses to offer cheap comfort or speak for the dead. Instead, she turns the question back on him, asking what he truly believes. Alfred's head hangs low, lost in the silence left by her question. He admits Kyle wasn't one to hold a grudge, but you can never truly know another's heart. Sano then shares a detail from Kyle's own sessions, a question he once posed. He had wondered if the party could truly win even without Alfred in the fight. Alfred tries to dismiss it, hoping his friend's death was just a tragic misfire, but Sano gently reminds him how he used to boast about Kyle's legendary skill. A faint smile appears as he recalls Kyle's impossible shots, a man who could read the wind itself. With absolute certainty, Alfred declares he had never once seen his friend miss. And as the words leave his mouth, the hero's expression begins to change. Sano's question lands with surgical precision. Then why did he miss that time? His disciple watches from the doorway, her expression unreadable. She realizes Sano isn't giving answers. She never had them to begin with. Alfred can only stammer in denial, refusing to believe the implication. The memory flashes back to the day he first recruited his friend, Kyle. Even back then, Kyle seemed less than thrilled with Alfred's grand plans. In the present, Alfred explains they were all prepared to die against Sirius. The demon general was a foe humanity hadn't defeated in 1,000 years. And the horrifying truth dawns on him. Kyle joined to protect him. Sano continues, questioning why anyone would force a retreat in such a dire battle. Alfred sits in stunned silence, the pieces of his friend's sacrifice falling into place. Alfred finally understands that his friend had already made his resolve. Sano gently asks him to clarify what exactly Kyle was prepared for. The hero's eyes widen as the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicks into place. He remembers the sight of his friend, fallen on the battlefield with an arrow in his back. He recalls screaming at Kyle to retreat, to get back behind the barrier. But Kyle simply smiled, saying he would handle the small fry just like old times. He had created an opening for them, screaming for everyone else to run. It wasn't a misfire, it was a sacrifice made to defeat Sirius and protect Alfred. Sano listens with a gentle, knowing expression, letting the truth settle. From the doorway, his disciple finally understands the depth of Kyle's loyalty. Alfred realizes that unlike physical threats, there is no magic to heal a wounded heart. He finally grasps the truth. To Kyle, his life was worth more than humanity's future. And because of that sacrifice, he feels he is truly unworthy of the title of hero. Sano once again asks him that simple, piercing question. Why? A single silent tear falls from his eye, rippling the surface of his drink. From the doorway, his disciple notes that these tears are different from before. These are tears of understanding for a friend who chose to protect the hero above all else. He breaks down, blaming himself for dragging such a loyal fool into his party. As Sano takes her notes, she identifies the source. Tears of regret for a friend's death. She sees the sorrow for his best friend has finally transformed. Guess this therapy thing actually works. The city is quiet now as a lone figure walks through the empty streets. With the truth finally settled in his heart, Alfred walks away from the hidden room. His disciple knows that without this healing, he never would have returned from the next battle alive. She and Sano watch from the window, two observers of a hero's fragile soul. Sano quietly remarks on the crushing weight of such a difficult mission. The disciple mistakes the comment for herself, brushing it off as just being a counselor. She clarifies that she doesn't see her role as some grand destiny. But Sano corrects her. She was talking about the true burden-bearer, Alfred. She reflects that in her world, no one ever had to carry the hope of all humanity alone. The disciple then asks what kind of people Sano used to counsel back home. Sano explains her clients were just normal people, exhausted by their regrets and trauma. The disciple realizes that beneath the title of hero, Alfred is just a man. She playfully tells Sano to act more like a master, but Sano finds it embarrassing. But the disciple admits that after 1,000 years, such simple concepts are hard to grasp. The former sage of the hero's party muses that if Sano is the youth, then she is the patient. She recalls Sano's words, that the human heart aches from its own contradictions, like the need to smile when all you want to do is cry. She then reveals her true purpose. She is the one who has raised generations of heroes. And after 1,000 years of war, she believed meeting Sano was a blessing, because she herself was on the verge of losing her own heart. The sage sits in quiet contemplation, absorbing the weight of Sano's words. Sano notices her by the window, lost in a silent prayer for the fallen. She admits she'd forgotten Kyle was also Sano's client, feeling ashamed of her oversight. She wonders if a simple prayer is all her world offers to truly mourn the dead. She asks if Sano avoids emotional investment, but Sano simply deflects the question. Sano clarifies that she never wants to become a heartless psychologist. The sage seems to understand, her own past weighing heavily on her mind. She confesses that once, all she ever wanted was to be like a shooting star. The memory cuts to a sudden piercing scream echoing through the halls. A flashback shows the sage ready for battle, while her companion wonders if they've stumbled into a bad CGI movie. The source of the scream is Sano, who has spotted a terrifying enemy. But the great threat turns out to be a single cockroach on the wall. Sano can't believe that even a fantasy world isn't safe from these pests. The sage simply says her name, trying to get her attention. Sano looks up, completely flustered by the bizarre situation. But the conversation is cut short as the bug takes flight, sending her into a panic. The sage then asks a strange question. If this world was Sano's fantasy? Sano can only stare back, having no idea what she's talking about. As Sano clings to her in terror, the sage calmly welcomes her to this new reality. She explains that for a century, the kingdom tried to use Marabido against the demon lord. The sage continues, explaining that this clinical psychologist was their secret weapon. She believed with all her heart that Sano was the one who could help them win. A key to demon lord subjugation who was, at that moment, terrified of a cockroach. The story then shifts to the bustling streets of the capital city. A crowd parts as a gravely wounded man is rushed toward the cathedral. His injuries are catastrophic, a wound that no ordinary person could survive. A hooded figure races through the streets, desperate to reach the dying man. Elsewhere, patrons in a tavern grimly accept that such a wound is a death sentence. But the hooded figure finally reaches the man, placing a hand over the injury. A brilliant light erupts as the flesh miraculously knits itself back together. The man is back on his feet, screaming apologies to his wife as the crowd stares in awe. The mysterious healer makes a hasty retreat, leaving the crowd to identify her. Even the tavern patrons are stunned, realizing they just witnessed a true miracle. So much for a graceful exit, as the powerful healer faceplants in the street. This brings us back to Sano, who is clearly not adjusting well to fantasy life. She complains to a tiny elf that she can't sleep while sharing a room with a cockroach. The tiny elf offers a strange excuse, which only leaves Sano more confused. Just then, the healer from the street bursts in, apologizing for being late. It's Sophia, who is promptly informed that her lateness is actually being 10 minutes early. The tiny elf just sighs, offering to make tea for their overeager guest. The mysterious healer is Saint Ernston, a shy woman known for her constant apologies. The sage reflects that Alfred wasn't the only one who lost Kyle, and she worried for another's heart. After all, the hero's party boasts the most powerful healer in recorded history. A woman who, throughout her own session with Sano, never once stopped smiling. When asked how she is, Ernston declares with pure joy that she's doing wonderfully. But Sano's professional gaze sees something more beneath the cheerful surface. She notes an out-of-place euphoria, a joy that doesn't quite fit the situation. The sage recalls that Ernston was once suffering from a deep, crippling depression. A memory from a year ago reveals her pain, a healer who couldn't save a living thing. The world's greatest healer, defeated by the tragic fate of a single butterfly. In the past, Ernston had suggested they build a grave and pray for the fallen butterfly. The tiny elf offered a prayer, hoping it would be reborn as a person in its next life. Ernston had questioned her own worth, wondering how she could be the hero's healer. The tiny elf recalls meeting her, noting that in 1,000 years she'd never seen such a healer. She had tried to stop Ernston, explaining the party already had a cleric named Daria. But the news was grim. Daria and the entire hero's party had been annihilated. The revelation was a shock that shattered the peace of the cathedral. And so the kingdom was forced to select a new party to face the demon lord. The tiny elf had asked what Daria meant to her, and Ernston admitted she was like a sister. The memory is a painful one, a name that still carries the weight of immense loss. The sage had urged Ernston to take up the mantle, to avenge her fallen sister. The memories of battle are a chaotic blur, with Kyle's voice cutting through the noise. He'd always warned the others to protect their healer, the party's fragile lifeline. But Ernston would often rush headfirst into danger, ignoring their pleas to stay back. Her only thought was to heal, a desperate obsession born from her past failure. Around the campfire, the party's swordsman, Liam, tried to teach her self-defense. He reminded her that clerics were forbidden from taking lives, a sacred rule. He insisted their job was to fight so she could heal, keeping her hands clean of their bloody work. But Kyle quickly shut him down, reminding him of Alfred's long and tragic history. He then turned to Liam, asking him to count the times Ernston had saved his life. Kyle reassures Ernston, promising to protect her as they're both in the rear guard. The memory shifts to their triumphant return, the entire city cheering their names. But even amidst the celebration, Ernston's heart was heavy. Kyle gently reminds her that waving to the people is part of their duty. He even has to physically lift her arm, a gentle push into the spotlight, and as she does, the crowd erupts, chanting the name of their beloved saint. Kyle looks down at her with a gentle, knowing smile. He takes her hand, a simple gesture that speaks volumes. The story shifts back to when Sano first arrived in this world. We see her setting up her new office, preparing a space for healing. The story returns to Sano's 5th day in this world, meeting her next client. The tiny elf introduces Saint Ernston, who formally greets the new counselor. Sano apologizes for the messy office, but the elf clarifies Ernston is here to help. Sano offers to assist with the move-in, but the saint politely declines the offer. The sage recalls setting up this meeting, apologizing for the sudden summons. And just like that, Ernston became the second member of the hero's party to sit in Sano's chair. The session begins with Sano introducing herself and her purpose. The sage admits that at the time she was still gauging Sano's true skills. Sano opens with a gentle probe, mentioning she heard Ernston was feeling unwell. The saint confirms it, admitting her worries have worsened since the expedition ended. Sano confirms the doctors found no physical cause for Ernston's condition. The sage reflects that when the body is fine, the problem is almost always in the heart. Ernston looks hesitant, unsure how to proceed with this strange new treatment. She asks what kind of magic a counselor uses, admitting her own skills only heal the flesh. Sano just smiles, offering a cryptic and frankly unhelpful one-word answer. The saint is completely lost, explaining that as a commoner, she knows nothing of such spells. Sano finally clarifies her method. She simply listens, as if they were just sharing tea. Ernston can only stare back, baffled by the sheer simplicity of the approach. She questions if just talking can truly cure her, as Sano hints at a secret technique. With a gentle smile, Sano assures her that depending on the illness, it absolutely can. Ernston is clearly suspicious of this whole setup, and Sano can't help but call her on it. Sano explains that her secret technique involves a specific program, starting with taking notes. This process involves creating a record of both subjective and objective observations. The subjective part is simply what the patient says about their own symptoms, but the objective part is what the psychologist observes: expressions, mannerisms, and tone. By combining these with a client's history, she can begin to find the root of the problem. Ernston admits it's embarrassing for a hero to be sick, but Sano reminds her of confidentiality. She assures the saint that there is absolutely no shame in what she's feeling. Ernston is taken aback by her sincerity, offering a quiet, reflexive apology. But Sano's focus remains unbroken, her gaze steady and professional. Sano's notes paint a clear picture, a humble hero with low self-esteem and a habit of apologizing. She shifts the topic, asking a simple question about how Ernston has been sleeping. The saint is immediately on guard, questioning why Sano would ask such a thing. Sano jots down another observation, a clear distrust of the counselor and her methods. Ernston tries to brush off the question, but her hesitation speaks volumes. But Sano disarms her with a smile, admitting she hasn't been sleeping well either. The confession catches Ernston completely off guard, her defensiveness faltering. For the first time, she looks at Sano with genuine empathy, understanding her struggle. The sage explains that a counselor should never reveal personal details. But Sano deliberately broke that rule to gain her trust and guide the session forward. Sano begins to explain her own struggles, a calculated move to build rapport. Ernston admits she can't sleep either. Sano's gambit was a critical hit. Sano connects her exhaustion to the recent expedition, a simple but effective observation. And with that small opening, the floodgates break, and Ernston finally begins to talk. She describes waking up suddenly, finding a kindred spirit in Sano's shared experience. She confesses her guilt over worrying Alfred, confirming Sano's diagnosis of low self-esteem. Ernston admits to crying for no reason, a sign of emotional numbness setting in. She even reveals a fear of the party's warrior Liam, blaming herself for the feeling. She'll go entire days without eating, her motivation and even her appetite gone. She believes the party's mage hates her, another sign of her spiraling perception. She then confesses that Kyle was injured in battle because of her, a telling slip of familiarity. Sano's gaze sharpens, her professional mind latching onto this crucial detail. Her focus intensifies, realizing the significance of this seemingly small piece of the puzzle. Sano gently suggests that it's good to have at least one person you can open your heart to. She glances back at the sage, as if checking on her observer before dismissing the thought. Ernston's composure finally breaks, admitting through tears that Kyle was kind to her. She quickly adds that everyone is kind, but the sage is practically eating popcorn from the doorway. The conversation flows naturally now, with Seino noting it's like watching two friends chat. Outside, the sage begins to reminisce with Sophia about her own past experiences. The scene shifts, pulling back from the room where a hero's heart is slowly being mended. Ernston finally asks the question weighing on her, "Am I sick?" Seino clarifies she's no doctor, but the symptoms are familiar from her world. She describes an illness unknown here, a tendency towards what she calls depression, an illness that, if left unchecked, can lead to the darkest of thoughts. And unfortunately, this world's pharmacy doesn't stock antidepressants. Ernston's anxiety spikes. If her illness causes a death, she believes it's her fault. But Seino's expression remains calm, her logic unswayed by emotion. She offers a different perspective. Responsibility for a death lies with the killer. The simple, direct statement leaves the saint completely stunned. Seino reassures her that while she understands the feeling, there's no need to worry. Seino then reveals she has one last trick up her sleeve: actual antidepressants. The sage can only stare, completely floored by this impossible revelation. Ernston is in disbelief, but Seino explains this is a precious gift just for her. She mixes the medicine into a cup of tea, a simple delivery for a modern miracle. Seino watches, waiting for the saint's reaction to the treatment. Ernston takes a tentative sip, her skepticism still lingering. But a sudden jolt of surprise runs through her. She admits to feeling a strange warmth, a comfort she hasn't felt in ages. Seino's expression remains unreadable, her work not yet finished. As Ernston leaves, Seino gives her final instructions for this new daily ritual. The sage watches Ernston leave, relieved that Seino had the right medicine for her. But from the balcony, Seino reveals the shocking truth. It was just sugar. The sage questions how sugar could possibly work, as Seino explains anything would have. Seino passionately defends her methods, insisting this is a legitimate form of treatment. She drags the tiny elf along, explaining the power of the placebo effect. The sage panics, thinking Seino is just making up words to trick her. But Seino insists that the power of belief is real, a force backed by actual data. Of course, she adds that rest and removing the source of stress are still key. She explains that in battle, baseless confidence can lead to ruin. But the sage finally understands, a smug look on her face as the concept clicks into place. Seino explains that without the right diagnostic tools, antidepressants are far too risky to use. She reveals a terrifying truth: a misdiagnosis could actually push a patient over the edge. The sage is horrified, wondering what kind of backwards world invents suicide pills. Seino clarifies that while doctors must be cautious, ignoring the illness is also a grave risk. She reveals that in her world, the root cause for such despair is almost always depression. The tiny elf wonders if this is some kind of mental attack, but Seino quickly shuts that down. She looks out over the capital, explaining that her world has no magic to blame for its suffering. The sage is floored, asking if Seino's country is even functional with such a statistic. Seino simply replies that her world has no demon lords or wars to contend with. The sage reflects on this bustling fantasy world, admitting she was in awe of Seino's abilities. The scene shifts to a local tavern, where news of the next expedition is spreading like wildfire. Patrons are shocked to hear that Ernston will be joining the party on their next mission. The sage, sitting nearby with Seino, quietly tells the gossiping men to keep their voices down. Seino offers a quiet apology, feeling the tension in the room. The sage asks if the fake medicine is still working, wondering what Seino's next move is. She considers asking the kingdom to let Ernston sit this one out, but dismisses it as a foolish idea. After all, how could they possibly send the hero's party on a mission without their healer? Seino looks back at her grimly, asking if she's trying to get the entire party killed. The sage explains that for the sake of public morale, the heroes must be seen heading into battle, which leads Seino to wonder if this fantasy world has ever heard of a little thing called labor laws. The sage admits that in all her years she's never heard of such a concept. She explains that the king is above the law and would never allow a hero to shirk their duty. Seino listens, the grim reality of this world setting in. She finally remembers that this isn't a democracy, it's a dictatorship at war. But the sage reminds her there's an even more fundamental issue at play. She declares that with humanity's survival at stake, even she cannot agree to let Ernston rest. Seino takes in the weight of her words, her expression grim. The sage tells her not to look with such judgment, but Seino admits she was the one being naive. She slams her mug down, declaring that if remission isn't an option, she'll try another way. Her new approach is something called cognitive therapy, a term Ernston has never heard before. Sano explains that while many people do this unconsciously, Ernston is still taking her medicine. She listens intently, her focus unwavering as the session continues. The sage points out that in a war, stress is a constant, so the goal is to manage it. Sano brings up Ernston's past words, asking how she felt when she realized the killer bears the blame. The saint reflects on this, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She finally admits that Sano's logic was in fact sound. Sano simply acknowledges her answer, letting the thought sink in, and the realization dawns on Ernston. She doesn't have to blame herself for the lives she can't save. Sano calmly declares that this is cognitive therapy, as the sage finally connects the dots. She explains that depression is often caused by chronic stress, but Ernston's personality is also a factor. Sano explains that Ernston's personality makes her prone to these feelings of guilt. She carries the weight of every death, a self-imposed stress that poisons every victory. From the side, the sage realizes this is about consciously changing one's own mind. Sano then asks if Ernston believes the party's kindness is reserved only for her. The saint quickly refutes this, insisting they are kind to everyone, not just her. Sano then introduces the next step in their therapy, a written exercise. She maps out Ernston's cognitive distortions, showing how one negative thought spirals into another. For the first time, Ernston sees her own internal logic laid bare, and it's a revelation. She realizes that seeing it written down makes her sorrow feel less like an absolute truth. With a grateful heart, she agrees to continue the treatment, a small victory for them both. Ernston is left speechless, a blush creeping across her cheeks. Sano simply waits, her expression questioning and patient. After a moment of hesitation, the saint finally begins to speak. Through tears, she confesses her deepest wish, to ask Kyle out on a date. From the doorway, the sage understands the urgency of a life lived on the battlefield, but Sano's response is not one of simple comfort or encouragement. Ernston asks if her dream is perhaps too naive for their world. Sano fires back, asking why she hasn't even planned a proper date itinerary. The sage even chimes in, suggesting she plan the outing with her sister. But Ernston balks at the idea of a diner for a first date, her romantic ideals clashing with reality. From the window, the sage watches as Ernston departs, a lone figure in white. She remarks that Sano's power is real. Ernston's light has visibly returned. But Sano remains silent, prompting the sage to ask what's wrong. Sano states firmly that she can't let Ernston go on the next expedition. The sage warns her not to be too optimistic about their chances of changing things. After all, Ernston is driven by a powerful need to avenge her fallen sister. The sage can only agree, knowing the weight of that particular burden. And so, for the next 6 months, their sessions became a ritual after every mission. The hero's party carved a path of victory, saving nations and rescuing hundreds. And by their 4th expedition, Ernston was a true saint, waving to the cheering crowds. The story flashes back to the fated battle against the demon general Sirius. We see the moment Alfred described, Kyle, fallen with an arrow in his back. But this time, we see it through Ernston's eyes as she screams his name in horror. Kyle had stood before the general, telling him to witness what was about to happen. He reached out a final defiant gesture before making his ultimate sacrifice. Ernston could only watch, her heart shattering at the sight of his fall. Her expression is one of pure, undiluted trauma, a memory seared into her soul. In the aftermath, she was left alone with the crushing weight of her grief. The final moments of the battle were a blur of chaos and destruction. And it all ended in a massive explosion, because of course it did. This is a fantasy world. And just like that, the battle was won, the demon general Sirius finally defeated. But Ernston is frantic, pleading with the mage to drop the barrier so she can save him. The party's swordsman Liam can only tell her that it's no use. The mage holds her back, refusing to let her run into the aftermath. The horrifying truth sinks in. Her divine power is useless against death itself. In the present, she recalls through tears how Kyle had cast his bow aside. She confirms it was Kyle who defeated Sirius, but the victory cost him everything. And yet she can't help but smile, admitting he was incredibly cool in the end. Sophia stands by, her stoic gaze taking in the difficult confession. And Sano simply listens, absorbing every painful detail of the saint's story. Sano notes that Ernston can now smile when speaking of Kyle's death. But she cuts in, her expression turning serious as she addresses the saint directly. Ernston slams her hands on the desk, declaring that Kyle still lives on inside her, making her strong. Sano's gaze sharpens, questioning what exactly Ernston means by strong. The sage stands by, a silent observer to this sudden, intense shift. Ernston's answer is a firm and unwavering yes. She admits that in her grief-fueled rage, she kicked the demon general's corpse repeatedly. She even boasts that Liam is now teaching her swordsmanship, praising her natural talent. Sano smiles, agreeing that Ernston has a gift, one that Kyle helped her find. The sage warns her to keep this a secret, joking that the archbishop would cry if he knew. Ernston playfully reminds the sage to keep her newfound swordsmanship a secret. She then gets close, gushing over how cute the sage is when she's forced to be silent. But inside the room, Sano's expression is anything but playful. From the doorway, the sage recognizes the signs, a swing from deep depression to manic euphoria. Ernston declares herself cured, crediting both Kyle and Sano for her recovery. But Sano jots down her concerns, knowing this isn't a cure at all. There's a wild, almost frantic energy in the saint's eyes. Sano explains that what Ernston believes is a recovery is actually a different illness. The scene cuts abruptly to a slipper swatting a cockroach, the true final boss. A young girl with braided hair sits frozen as a bug buzzes past her head. Sano explains this is a classic symptom, a manic swing fueled by divine purpose. An illness that sends its victims careening between crushing depression and wild euphoria. Meanwhile, back in the office, Sano is dealing with a more immediate six-legged threat. Thankfully, Sophia handles the pest control, earning Ernston's heartfelt gratitude. But Sano is more worried about the saint, asking if she's truly okay. Ernston's reply is odd, wondering aloud if the cockroach was human in a past life. There's a feverish intensity in her eyes, a sign that she's far from stable. Sophia simply states that she's fine, her expression as unreadable as ever. But Ernston's mind drifts, recalling a figure she believes wasn't even human. She then asks if this world is full of things worth dying for, a chilling thought from a healer. Sano listens to Ernston's chilling words, her expression somber as she simply says, "I see." As she takes her notes, she gives the illness a name from her world, bipolar disorder. The sage understands the diagnosis, a vicious cycle of extreme highs and crushing lows. But for treatment to begin, Sano must deliver a harsh truth. This isn't strength, it's a new sickness. She calls out to Ernston, trying to break through the manic haze. The saint snaps back to reality, looking flustered and a little confused. She glances at her pocket watch, suddenly realizing how much time has passed. Ernston quickly gets up, explaining she's late for her secret sword practice with Liam. Sano can only watch, her concern growing with every passing second. Ernston apologizes for leaving, but Sano questions a cleric learning to use a sword, which is promptly dismissed as a secret. The door slams shut, leaving a sudden, heavy silence in its wake. Sano and the sage are left alone in the now empty office. The sage wonders aloud if Ernston's depression has simply gotten worse. But Sano clarifies that while the symptoms overlap, this is a different illness entirely. The placebo that treated her depression may have inadvertently triggered this manic state. The sage questions telling her the truth, knowing Ernston will likely reject it. Sano agrees, deciding it's better to wait for Ernston to realize it herself. She knows the euphoric high won't last, the depressive crash is inevitable. And she fears that when it comes, Ernston's heart won't survive facing her grief again. With her resolve set, Sano turns to the sage asking for a favor. The sage agrees without hesitation, telling Sano to ask for whatever she needs. The scene cuts to the Royal Knights training grounds, a field of defeated soldiers. The party swordsman, Liam, has single-handedly taken them all down in a brutal sparring session. He roars at them, furious that they'd complain about a 20-to-1 fight. He questions their worth as knights, reminding them that only 5 heroes faced the demon army. He stands alone, demanding to know if they understand the meaning of that sacrifice. His rage finally finds its target. He screams that Kyle died because they were all too weak. But a cheerful voice cuts through the tension, and it's none other than Ernston. Talk about reading the room. From a balcony above, the sage watches, surprised to see the saint has already arrived. Ernston lands gracefully in the training yard, directly in front of a stunned Liam. The sage steps into the training yard, ordering the defeated knights to rise. Liam questions her presence, reminding her he's her disciple now, not an instructor. She fires back, asking when he took on that role, reminding him his focus should be on Ernston. He explains Ernston showed up on her own, and he was just trying to find a replacement for Kyle. The knights murmur amongst themselves, shocked by the sage's demeanor and their own weakness. The sage challenges him directly, wanting to see what this new instructor is made of. As the knights protest her disrespect, she basically tells them to get good. Liam points his sword at her. amused by her sudden spirit and questioning who taught her to be so bold. He then abruptly ends the conversation, declaring he's taking Ernston with him. The sage finally reveals her purpose. She's here to make sure Ernston gets the rest she needs. Saino's silhouette stands as she recalls the goal of therapy, to calm the storm. The sage reminds Liam she warned him 6 months ago that Ernston needed rest, but he scoffs at the diagnosis, calling it a fancy name for simple weakness. She corrects him, stating that Ernston is now suffering from a different illness entirely. Liam argues that Ernston has only gotten stronger, mocking the idea of a strengthening sickness. The sage calmly states that this is exactly what Saino had explained to her. At the mention of Saino's name, Liam's tone darkens with a warning. He turns away, declaring he finally understands why the kingdom's knights are so pathetic. Back in her office, Saino's thoughts drift to the next part of her plan. Liam's hand crushes a stone railing, believing only those who know pain can be strong. The sage realizes that Liam and Ernston are the worst possible combination right now. He roars that it was their weakness, their lack of pain, that got Kyle killed. The tiny elf, Sophia, rushes to the side of the injured knight, John. Her eyes narrow with fury, her gaze locked on the party's swordsman. The other knights turn to Ernston, pleading with her to heal their fallen comrade. But Ernston just smiles, asking why she should heal a wound Liam worked so hard to give. Even Liam is taken aback, seeing her twisted logic as a sign of newfound strength. He boasts to the sage that his methods have clearly made Ernston stronger. The sage's hand tightens on a sword hilt. She understands now that talking is over. Sophia steps forward to challenge Liam herself, as he scoffs at the legendary sage's audacity. Ernston watches with a serene, almost blissful smile, completely detached from the tension. The other knights can only stare in disbelief as the situation rapidly escalates. Liam roars a challenge, telling the sage not to die as he swings his massive blade. The story cuts away to a strange vision of a woman like Saino, being told it's dangerous to live alone. Her companion dismisses her worries, saying she was brought here for her strength. A man with silver hair then appears, questioning why she brought up the topic first. The woman can only react with stunned confusion at his words. Back in the present, the sage lunges forward, a blur of motion against the swordsman. But something stops her cold, her eyes widening in sudden shock. She turns to a fallen knight, assuring him that she too can be gentle in her own way. The sage lets out a sharp gasp, her charge brought to a sudden halt. A memory flashes through her mind. Liam, a whirlwind of steel against a sea of enemies. The vision shifts to a woman who looks just like Saino, being offered a place to live. The woman smiles, moved by the pure excitement of a young girl named Lyra. But a silver-haired man at the table seems skeptical of this sudden generosity. He's called Lord Ashlyn, a man whose kind exterior seems to hide a darker nature. Another woman reassures them the villa is safe, as Ashlyn sips his tea like a villain in waiting. Back in the present, Liam grins, impressed that the old woman dodged his strike. He throws one of his swords ready to escalate the fight against the legendary sage, but her expression is one of cold, unwavering resolve, her battle far from over. With a flick of her wrist, the sage sends a dagger flying, disarming Liam in an instant. She stands ready, her own sword drawn, proving she's more than just an old woman. Liam hits the ground, clutching his hand in pain, utterly defeated by her speed. The knights can only stare in disbelief, their legendary sage revealing her hidden strength. The vision shifts back to the past, where Ashlyn questions his mother's lack of trust in him. His mother simply smiles, asking the Saino lookalike to be a playmate for her young daughter. The woman who looks like Saino watches the exchange, her expression calm and observant. The little girl is ecstatic, already planning sleepovers and gushing over her prince, Ashlyn. The narrative explains that from that day forward, she began working alongside Lord Ashlyn. The next morning, she greets him formally as they prepare to depart in a carriage. With impossible calm, the sage stops his blade with the palm of her hand. Her style is described as both bold and delicate, always seeing several moves ahead. Liam can only admit that for an unarmed old woman, she is terrifyingly strong. She dodges his next strike with blinding speed, a blur of white robes. A memory flashes, showing the moment Liam first offered her a sword. The day she accepted the hilt, agreeing to become his unlikely disciple. The other vision continues, the Saino lookalike recalling a busy day of work. Inside the carriage, she playfully admits she wanted to see Ashlyn play the prince. It seems his duties as a royal playmate for the young girl are far from over. She smirks, realizing she won't see his darker, scheming side for a while. The sage declares that he has hurt people for far too long. She tells him it's time he was taught a painful lesson of his own. Ernston looks up, a flicker of surprise on her otherwise serene face. As Liam rages at her disrespect, the sage calmly accepts his challenge. He clicks his tongue, annoyed that she continues to interfere. He turns to leave, but she accuses him of being the one who's running away. The vision shifts again as a young man cheerfully greets the woman now called Lyra. He scrambles to prepare a seat for her, eager to make a good impression. Lyra watches him fumble with the papers, a classic case of bless his heart. She gently thanks the boy, Tick, telling him she can take it from here. Lyra simply agrees, her expression unreadable as she accepts her new role. Back in the present, the sage's eyes lock onto an incoming blade. With a powerful strike, she deflects the sword, embedding it deep into a training dummy. The knights are completely dumbfounded by this display of impossible strength. Sophia steps forward, her words a sharp jab at Liam's pride. The vision returns to Ashlyn, who begins to explain the details of their new project. The young man, Tick, is practically vibrating with excitement, ready to get started. Lyra takes a deep breath, psyching herself up for the work ahead. Their first order of business is to improve the quality of the knight's medical supplies. Ashlyn explains the larger goal, to create a stable system for producing quality medicine. Lyra listens intently, a thoughtful expression on her face as she considers the plan. Ashlyn suggests they start by improving the medical recipes from the Gilguista kingdom. Back in the present, Liam grits his teeth, declaring this confrontation is unavoidable. The sage's hand drips with blood, but her gaze remains fixed and utterly silent. Liam is stunned by her skill, questioning how a cleric can wield a sword so expertly. He demands to know who she is, as another knight recalls she joined the party on the king's order. The narration explains that most elves are lazy, content to live out their long lives in peace. But the sage declares that even among her people, she has always been an exception. In the other timeline, Ashlyn notes their research materials are all back in Gilguista. Lyra confidently states she has memorized every single recipe she has ever made. Ashlyn and his aides can only stare, completely stunned by Lyra's impossible claim. Tick asks if she truly means everything: ingredients, dosages, timing, and combinations. The others are in awe of her terrifying intellect as Tick laments his own struggles. The story shifts back to the sage, who spent her first 2 centuries collecting magic. She then dedicated a century to medicine, studying healing as a humble monk. She mastered archery and martial arts, though admits Kyle's skill with a bow surpassed her own. And for the last century, she has studied the sword, a period 4 times longer than Liam's entire life. Back in the other timeline, Ashlyn asks if her memory includes a cure for the Great Wheat Blight. He notes that using the recipe as is could cause international issues, suggesting they alter it. After all, introducing a similar medicine could create serious problems with her home kingdom. But Ashlyn just smiles, dismissing the concern as if it were nothing at all. Lyra and the others can only stare, shocked by his casual approach to international politics. Back in the present, a knight reflects that the title of sage is not one given lightly. She is, after all, considered the very pinnacle of human wisdom and strength. Liam asks what she spent the last 5 centuries doing, and she simply replies, training. The other knights whisper that for the truly powerful, this isn't a hobby, it's a calling. She accepts a sword from a nearby soldier, declaring that this is her sacred mission. A scarred warrior in the crowd looks on, wondering what in the world is happening. In the other timeline, Ashlyn questions why Lyra was held back in her home kingdom. Lyra considers his theory, finding the term scheming braggart to be a surreal but fitting title. Ashlyn smiles, suggesting any similar medicine would be a happy little coincidence. Lyra and the others can only stare, realizing their new boss is a certified schemer. The scene cuts back to the sage, her gaze fixed on her true purpose, the demon lord's defeat. The scarred warrior watches from the crowd, his expression unreadable. Lyra reflects that for such a pretty face, Ashlyn's words are surprisingly twisted. But Ashlyn quickly brushes the topic aside, eager to move on to the next phase. Lyra is already 1 step ahead, having prepared improved recipes on the spot. Her new colleagues are stunned, realizing her formulas will be far more effective. The team is immediately energized, asking to begin preparations right away. The story then dives into the sage's past, 1,000 years of war and loss. She declares that 1,000 years of sorrow fuels her resolve to see this through. The other knights can only watch, completely out of their depth as legends clash. The vision shifts back to Lyra, who seems to be blushing from some unseen praise. The scarred warrior questions a small creature, wondering why it follows a swindler. Back in her own timeline, Lyra rallies Tick, ready to head to the research lab. A woman watches them go, a worried expression on her face. Apparently, not everyone shares their boundless optimism. Ashlyn brings up their next problem, ensuring the quality and stability of their new medicine. But Lyra just smiles, clarifying that she doesn't have an idea, she has a solution. Ashlyn decides to stop asking questions, telling her to just show him what she can do. And back in the present, the sage's gaze is like steel, her battle just beginning. The narration reveals that Sano's psychotherapy is the true key. It is the very cornerstone of their plan to defeat the demon lord. In the other timeline, Lyra explains the optimal drying time for each herb. Ashlyn can only stare, trying to process the sheer complexity of her work. Tick, meanwhile, is having a full-blown meltdown over the thousands of variables. But Lyra casually explains she has a formula, as if it's simple arithmetic. Ashlyn clutches his head, suddenly feeling very inadequate in her presence. Back in the present, the scarred warrior continues to watch the standoff. He lets out a sharp, unimpressed grunt, clearly tired of the drama. He then shouts at Ernston, ordering her to heal the knight Liam injured. Ernston's response is chilling, quoting Liam's belief that inflicting pain is a form of love. The scarred warrior reminds the sage that human lives are fleeting compared to her own. He argues that even weak soldiers are assets, and it's a waste to let them stay injured. The sage's expression is unreadable as she agrees to meet with him again. The warrior accepts her words, his gaze steady and resolute. The vision shifts again, as Lyra asks Ashlyn if he's brought back some incredible new talent. Back in the lab, Tick asks if Lyra can truly summarize her complex formulas. Ashlyn smoothly asks her to write it all down, and she readily agrees. But a sudden realization hits her, and she drops her papers in shock. The story cuts back to Sano, who smiles, ready to meet the key to defeating the demon lord. Sano and the sage stand ready as their next guest arrives, the scarred warrior. In the other timeline, Lyra's project hits a snag as Tick slumps over the desk in defeat. Ashlyn questions the delay, reminding him that Lyra supposedly remembers everything. Lyra explains that back home she never wrote anything down, she just gave the calculations daily. Tick panics, realizing that without a written formula, maintaining quality is impossible. Back in the present, the scarred warrior seems apologetic, but Sano is happy to have met him. As he leaves, the sage watches, her expression a mix of concern and contemplation. She reflects on her centuries-long role as a trusted figure, a legend in fairy tales. It was this reputation that allowed her to trust Sano's judgment and arrange this very meeting. Meanwhile, back in the past, Ashlyn lets out a small chuckle. Apparently, he finds chaos amusing. Ashlyn can't help but laugh, thoroughly entertained by this unexpected complication. Lyra, on the other hand, is completely lost, unable to see the humor in their predicament. She questions his amusement, but he just offers a half-hearted, unconvincing apology. He reflects that ever since her engagement ended, Lyra has finally started to show her true colors. But Tick's expression is one of pure concern, seeing a major flaw in their plan. The scene flashes back 6 months to the scarred warrior's first meeting with Sano. Sano confirms to the sage that the warrior was exactly as she had described. The sage worries that Liam's brutal methods will only worsen Ernston's already fragile state. She declares her intent to sever the root of the problem before it's too late. The sage turns to Sano, demanding to know what has changed. Sano explains that the scarred warrior was simply impressed by her sincerity. In the other timeline, Ashlyn finds it amusing that Lyra still worries about those who mistreated her. He calls her kind, but his tone suggests he sees it as a simple, exploitable trait. The scene flashes back to their first meeting, which was less than friendly. The warrior had noted her complete lack of magical power or any defensive reaction. He could tell instantly that she was no fighter, just an ordinary person. But the sage stepped in, declaring that even if Sano is a fraud, she is not. Back in the other timeline, Ashlyn continues to tease Lyra about being praised. He claims he's never received such an insincere compliment in his entire life. Lyra is left completely flustered, unsure how to respond to his backhanded praise. The warrior recalls his anger, yelling at Liam for dragging him into this meeting. He had been completely blindsided, expecting anything but a counseling session. But Sano calmly apologizes for the misunderstanding, inviting him to sit. She admits freely that she has no magic or sword skills. She is an ordinary person. The warrior and the sage listen, one skeptical, the other hopeful. Sano explains that her power comes from listening, a skill she has honed for years. In the other timeline, Lyra wonders what her friend Aisha would do in her place. She feels lost, admitting to herself that she doesn't know the right answer. But then, a sudden spark of inspiration hits her as she realizes the solution. For now, though, all she wants is to escape Ashland's intense, unreadable gaze. She declares herself a specialist of the heart, challenging his skepticism directly. The sage reflects on her own past failures, the pain she couldn't prevent. She remembers those who can only be moved by force, a stark contrast to Seino's methods. The warrior asks if she's afraid of being exposed as a fraud, but Seino just smiles, asking if he's the one who's afraid of losing. The warrior's surprise turns into a grudging smirk. This woman has guts. The sage explains that this game is how one sees into the human heart. Seino calls it truth or dare, a game from her world she'll use to save the heroes. She explains it's a game of dialogue, questioning if it seems like an interrogation. The warrior concedes the point. A good con artist would need to be a smooth talker. The warrior snaps at the sage, accusing her of making excuses for Liam's behavior. The sage just smirks, asking if he's truly afraid of losing to a warrior like her. He then turns to Seino, assuring her he'll go easy on her in this little game. But his gaze sharpens, the challenge accepted with deadly seriousness. He sets the terms: if she loses, she must swear to never approach the hero's party again. Seino calmly counters: if she wins, he must attend a session after every single mission. The sage watches with concern, wondering what kind of dangerous promise Seino is making. As drinks are poured, the quiet ritual of their strange battle begins. Seino explains the rules are simple, telling him to ask her the classic question, truth or dare. He looks her dead in the eye, telling her to choose her own fate, because he's just that accommodating. Without a moment's hesitation, Seino calmly chooses truth. She tells him to ask her anything, and if she can't answer, she loses the game. She clarifies that failing a dare also results in an immediate loss. The scarred warrior lets out a short, dismissive laugh, intrigued by her confidence. He questions if she's trying to bait him into an easy win. He even wonders aloud if all people from her world are just masochists. Seino reminds him she chose truth, but he scoffs, seeing it as the same kind of trap. From the side, the sage chimes in, basically telling him not to make this boring. Seino simply smiles, retorting that the same warning applies to him. Done with the banter, the warrior's expression hardens, demanding she prepare for his question. The warrior cuts straight to the point, asking how she managed to win over the sage. But the sage interjects, clarifying she never acknowledged him as a disciple. The warrior is stunned to learn that Sophia is just a self-proclaimed title. He remarks that for a woman she's surprisingly bold, a fact she readily confirms. The sage explains she was intrigued by Seino's profession and simply made an introduction. The warrior then turns back to Seino, demanding to know when she cured that illness. He presses for a name, but Seino calmly reminds him he only gets one question. The warrior scoffs, stating he has no interest in hearing about her other clients. Seino explains that she is bound by a strict code of professional confidentiality. She smiles, adding that if he asks about her clients, she'll be forced to forfeit the game. The warrior, Liam, lets out a grudging laugh, impressed by her clever wordplay. Seino declares that since he's playing, he should play to win, and now it's her turn. She puts the question to him, truth or dare? And he confidently chooses truth. He impatiently tells her to get on with it, ready for whatever she can throw at him. The sage watches, wondering what the point of this game is, as Liam urges Seino to ask her question. Seino's question is deceptively simple. Why did you come here today? Liam explodes, thinking she's mocking him, but the sage begins to understand Seino's method. Seino calmly explains it's the first question she asks any client, and he doesn't have to answer. She smiles, revealing her true goal, to use this game to conduct his first therapy session. Liam is left speechless, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Seino calmly asks him what his next move will be. Liam tries to justify himself, recalling how he once stabbed a knight for being too soft. Seino can only react with stunned silence at his brutal story. The sage reflects that she never approved of his methods, even after he became her disciple. Liam scoffs, warning them not to expect kindness or conscience in this world. He reminds her that his entire life has been dedicated to the art of killing. He tries to regain control, demanding they get back to the game. Someone's feeling a little exposed. The sage understands Seino's method. Self-disclosure is the key to any session. She realizes that as long as they stick to truth, this dangerous therapy can continue. But a flicker of doubt crosses her face, knowing this is a delicate and dangerous game. Seino's expression remains perfectly neutral, a mask of professional calm. But Liam's fury is palpable, warning her not to underestimate him. She calmly asks if he thinks she's threatening him, a disarming smile on her face. She then lays out the alternative, a dare which requires a certain kind of resolve. Liam scoffs, beginning to remove his cloak as if preparing for a challenge. The sage tries to interject, but Seino continues, explaining she is a rare kind of person. She clarifies that her presence in this kingdom was almost an accident. A vision reveals her solitary work, a path that often clashed with the kingdom's policies. But it was this path that led her to the heroes' party, to their hidden pain. She saw the darkness in their hearts, the trauma they carried in silence. Liam admits his own power is small, but he refuses to abandon the heroes' party. Seino's gaze is unwavering as she declares she will absolutely not back down. The sage chimes in, addressing Liam directly to break the tension. But Liam's focus is locked on Seino, questioning if she's the one underestimating this game. She calmly tells him to give his command as he wonders what kind of person she is. He grits his teeth, realizing that her confidence isn't just a bluff. He sees her for what she is, an ordinary person with no special power. And yet he notices her hands are trembling, betraying her hidden fear. He realizes with a jolt that she's fully prepared to follow any order. Talk about commitment. And the only question left in his mind is a simple one. Why? Seino looks him dead in the eye, stating firmly that she is no fraud. She continues, explaining that if she fails, she'll be the one to lose her qualifications. But she has no intention of backing down. This challenge is for her own sake. Liam tells her not to hold back, his expression hardening with resolve. He demands her command, ready to accept whatever dare she gives him. But the sage's words echo in his mind. Seino's therapy is the key to victory. He stares at her, wondering what kind of ordinary person could possess such power. The scene shifts to the Royal Knights training grounds where arrows fly true. A group of knights gossip from the sidelines, watching their vice commander. They recall a story of him once beating Kyle in archery when Kyle was 9. Guess that winning streak didn't last long. The vice commander approaches a mysterious woman, impressed by her skill. But she smiles, telling him she wants him right now. The archer is completely flustered by the sudden, intense praise. He smiles, admitting that he knew the legendary hero as well. But her smile is cold as she recalls watching Kyle burn to death in agony. The vice commander's blood runs cold as he finally recognizes her. She is Saraphina, a member of the heroes' party, and she steps closer with a veiled threat. She gently cups his face and the knight freezes in terror. She leans in, her eyes burning with a terrifying purpose. She wants his help to kill the demon lord. The knight panics and flees, making excuses about his family. Guess slaying the ultimate evil wasn't on his schedule. Saraphina simply calls his retreat pathetic, her expression as cold as ice. The other knights can only whisper in fear, shocked that she'd approach a married man. They scramble to find another archer, asking if literally anyone else will do. But in a cloud of dust, they all make a run for it, leaving her completely alone. She wonders why men seem to enjoy her advances, but flee when she asks for help. Lost and confused, she realizes there's only one person she can talk to, Seino. Back in the office, Seino looks up, her expression a silent question. Liam stares her down, his voice a low growl as he tells her to give her command. Seino remains still as Liam questions the sheer resolve in her eyes. He clicks his tongue, his frustration mounting in the face of her unwavering calm. Liam slams a bottle down on the table, a sudden, violent challenge. He pours a glass of what is clearly potent liquor, ordering her to drink. Seino's eyes widen, taking in the unspoken dare. The sage watches from the side, a question mark hanging over her expression. Liam begins to explain the terms, but he's about to be interrupted. Because Seino grabs the entire bottle and chugs it down, stunning them both into silence. She finishes, remarking that it's surprisingly easy to drink, leaving Liam speechless. The sage can only stare as Liam wonders what kind of monster he's dealing with. Seino just smiles, saying she's relieved he decided to be so gentle with her. Liam is left completely dumbfounded, his intimidation tactic having failed spectacularly. The scene flashes back to a rowdy tavern, a perfect setting for their high-stakes game. Seino cheerfully puts the question to Liam once more. Truth or dare? She points at the warrior, but he snaps at her, saying she's the one who lost this round. The sage chimes in, telling Seino to stop messing around and get on with it. Liam impatiently tells her to just ask her question. He's not afraid of a simple truth. So Seino asks him directly, why did you stab that knight in the leg? She recalls his core belief, the one that drives his every action. Pain makes people strong. Liam explains that in this peaceful world, no one is prepared for the reality of battle. He believes that getting them used to pain is a necessary, brutal lesson. Sano listens, her gaze steady as she acknowledges his twisted point of view. Sano simply asks what he means, but Liam just scoffs at her question. He calls the Royal Knights pampered boys who have no reason to be strong. He declares that to truly gain strength, one needs more than pain. They need hatred. Sano asks if he intentionally sought out that hatred, but he clarifies it was forced upon him. She realizes he's drawing a parallel. Ernston, too, found strength after losing Kyle. Liam scoffs at the idea of calling this an illness that can be cured with rest. He argues that their brutal methods are the only thing keeping them from being destroyed. Sano listens in silence, taking in the warrior's deeply held, twisted philosophy. He challenges her directly, questioning what right she has to judge their methods. But her gaze remains locked on him, her resolve unshaken by his words. With the ball back in his court, Liam declares that it's her turn now. He puts the question to her once more, truth or dare. He chooses truth for her, asking if her counseling can actually kill the demon lord. The sage watches on, her expression unreadable as the tension thickens. Liam's gaze is a challenge, waiting for the answer he thinks he already knows. But Sano just smiles, admitting that she has no such power. Liam is momentarily stunned into silence by her simple honesty. He gets up to leave, declaring her a fraud and ordering her to stay away. Guess he's not a fan of honest answers. But Sano's voice stops him, reminding him that defeating the demon lord is his job. Her job, she declares, is to make the hero's party strong enough to do it. Liam turns his back, delivering a final, brutal blow. Kyle is already dead. But Sano agrees, stating that's precisely why her work is so necessary. The warrior's eye widens, caught off guard by her unwavering conviction. Sano's gaze, however, remains as steady and calm as ever. He gives her one last dare. Order him to never return, and she'll win the game. Or she can watch Ernston and see if his methods truly make her stronger. With his challenge laid out, the warrior turns and walks toward the door. He scoffs at the sage, questioning how she could follow someone like Sano. The sage's reply is simple and firm, confirming her complete faith in Sano. Liam lets out a final, dismissive grunt before taking his leave. The door closes, leaving Sano and the sage alone in the heavy silence. As the city moves on below, Sano finally lets out a long, exhausted sigh. She collapses into a chair, admitting that the entire confrontation was terrifying. The sage asks if she was expecting a more violent dare, given Liam's reputation. Sano reflects that her initial goal was simply to understand the man through their game. She realizes his story about stabbing the knight wasn't a show of mercy, but something else entirely. The sage asks for her professional take on Liam's reaction when she showed him understanding. She notes that while he seemed to open up, she sensed a deep contradiction in his actions. The sage theorizes that Liam doesn't truly believe in the brutal philosophy he preaches. She recalls his earlier demand for Ernston to heal the very knight he'd injured. Sano is completely spent, admitting that if people only did what was right, her job wouldn't exist. She explains the world is full of people trapped by their own pain, forced into self-destructive cycles. The sage listens intently, a new understanding dawning in her ancient eyes. She glances at the empty bottle, wondering if Liam's brutality is just another addiction he can't control. Sano lifts her head, stating her purpose is to help people see the suffering they don't even realize they carry. She knew that to gain his trust, she had to meet his challenge head-on, because what kind of fraud would go that far? The sage realizes the true danger Sano was in, the brutal commands Liam could have given. Meanwhile, Sano is still feeling the effects of the alcohol, her plan having worked a little too well. She looks up in disbelief, asking if all psychologists are expected to go to such extremes. But the sage explains the first rule is self-preservation, questioning why Sano would willingly leap into the fire. Sano's eyes widen, the sage's question hitting her with full force. She admits that even back home, her teachers warned her about taking things too far. She wonders aloud how she developed such a reckless, confrontational personality. A moment of introspection follows, as if searching for an answer she'll never find. She flops over the chair in defeat, blaming it on her unchangeable nature. Classic. The sage simply accepts this, seeing the truth in her self-assessment. The narration notes that while she reads others, she rarely reveals her own heart. But their quiet moment is interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. It's Saraphina, the party's archer, arriving unannounced and looking for guidance. Sano rises to meet her, explaining she was hoping Saraphina would come. Saraphina looks at Sano, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. The sage points out the smell of alcohol, but Saraphina is the one who's clearly intoxicated. She begins to lecture Sano about drinking on the job, a lesson she apparently learned the hard way. As Sano apologizes, Saraphina decides to leave, admitting the therapist has a point. She tries to reschedule for the morning, but Sano explains that time is already booked for Ernston. Saraphina's expression darkens, her thoughts turning to the party's troubled saint. She mentions that everyone thinks Ernston is better now, that she smiles all the time. But Sano disagrees, stating that she sees something else entirely in that smile. As she walks away, Saraphina admits the truth. Ernston's new smile terrifies her. She assumes Sano thinks she's being strange and suggests meeting the next night instead. Sano quietly agrees to the new appointment, her expression unreadable. Night falls over the capital, blanketing the city in a tense silence. The next morning arrives, bringing with it a sense of quiet dread. Inside her office, Sano and the sage wait for their scheduled guest. The sage sips her tea, her ancient eyes filled with a quiet, heavy concern. She looks on, her expression betraying the weight of her centuries-long mission. But the appointed time comes and goes, and Ernston is a no-show. Sano explains that given Ernston's severe depression, it's no surprise she can't leave her room. The sage's mind flashes to the darkest possible outcome for the troubled saint. Sano tries to reassure her, stating that for a cleric, suicide is the ultimate sin. But Sano questions that logic, asking how any part of this is okay. The sage can only stand in silence, the weight of the situation clear on her face. She admits that in this world, there is no medicine for an illness like depression. All they can do is have someone stay by Ernston's side until the darkness passes. But the sage refuses, stating she must avoid creating a dual relationship. The narrative explains this is a professional boundary for counselors. It's why Sano has vowed to only meet the hero's party within her office. Sano insists that the sage is the one who should go to Ernston. So much for professional boundaries. She then reveals a stunning truth. The sage was Ernston's foster mother. But the sage looks away, admitting she only taught her magic and left her at the cathedral. Sano insists that Ernston trusts her, that she trusts Sophia. But the sage refuses, her voice cracking as she says it's no use. Sano presses on, asking the simple, devastating question, why? The sage's composure finally shatters, her eyes wide with guilt. She cries out that she is the true cause of Ernston's suffering. She declares that this fight is hers alone, not Kyle's, not Liam's. Sano can only listen, the weight of this confession hanging in the air. A silent moment passes, a reminder of the sage's long, complicated life. The sage finally understands why Sano was so insistent on calling her master. Sano admits her simple goal. She just wanted to change things for the better. Sano asks the sage a direct question. What is it that she truly wants to change? The sage's eyes are filled with 1,000 years of pain and regret. Her gaze hardens, a fire of ancient sorrow burning within her. The story flashes back 500 years, to a world torn apart by war. She walks through the ruins, a lone survivor on a desolate battlefield. She runs through the chaos, a blur of motion against a backdrop of destruction. And in the rubble she finds a life, a baby with a familiar scar over her eye. A memory of a man's face, his expression grim and resolute. His features are etched with the harsh realities of their endless war. The sage looks down at a fallen comrade, whispering a quiet, heartbroken apology. The man from her memory, Alan, asks if she found any other survivors. But their dying comrade argues it would be kinder to let the orphan perish. Sophia protests, but Alan silences her, refusing to abandon the child. He takes the baby, declaring that heroes fight to protect, not for revenge. He then tasks Sophia with naming the child, a duty for the sage of their party. Another companion insists that to die nameless would be the greatest cruelty. Sophia seems to question the point of it all in their desolate, war-torn world. But the child in her arms is completely at peace, unaware of the surrounding chaos. The infant reaches out, a simple touch that shatters Sophia's hardened resolve. Alan watches the moment unfold, a wide, almost unhinged smile on his face. The memory shifts to the faces of her old party, including a sharp-witted cleric, and a kind, bald warrior who was the party's steadfast shield. Sophia herself was younger then, her eyes filled with a different kind of fire. For a time, they were a family, raising the child they'd named Ark in a rare moment of peace. But that peace was shattered, leaving only Sophia and the boy to mourn at 3 fresh graves. She looks down at the child, the weight of her grief and resolve etched on her face. With a heavy heart, she declares that he, Ark, will be the next hero. She vows that together they will avenge the comrades they lost. The young boy can only agree, accepting a destiny far too heavy for his small shoulders. The memory of their fallen leader, Alan, is a wound that will never truly heal. But the hero she raised, Ark, was eventually lost to the endless war. In the aftermath, she continued to gather orphans, far more than the kingdom could support. Another child was found in the rubble of a cathedral, a lone survivor. But to the sage, every life saved was another potential weapon for her cause. She takes the infant girl into her arms, deciding to name the child herself. The baby is named Ernston, revealing the saint's tragic and complicated origin. Her method was a brutal cycle: raise them to fight, heal their wounds, and send them back. If one died, she would simply find another, perpetuating the cycle of violence. For 500 years, she repeated this folly, until the day she finally met Sano. The scene cuts to the present, as Liam screams for Ernston outside the cathedral. Guess knocking is out of style. The nuns try to stop him, but Liam barges into the women's quarters. But his path is blocked by the sage, who demands to know what he's doing. The other women bow in respect as Liam tells her to let him handle it. The sage's gaze is like ice as she asks him to repeat himself. He smirks, explaining he's just picking up Ernston for her training. He claims her illness is a thing of the past, that she's already overcome it. The sage's expression remains cold, her patience clearly wearing thin. Liam argues that Kyle's death has made Ernston stronger, more full of life. The sage cuts him off, asking if he still believes Sano is a fraud. Liam falls silent, the weight of her question hanging in the air. The sage realizes that in Liam, she sees only a reflection of her own past mistakes. She understands she has no right to judge him, for he is what she once was. She quietly speaks his name, her resolve hardening with every passing second. 1,000 years of skill and 500 years of training only built a mountain of corpses. Sano's question echoes in her mind. What does she truly want to change? She asks Liam to leave her alone with Ernston, declaring that today she will change. Liam tells her to stop, reminding her that she is, after all, a sage. But she dismisses the title, admitting it's just a name with no real meaning. He can only click his tongue in frustration, completely outmaneuvered. Night falls over the cathedral, a silent witness to the day's heavy confessions. Inside the cathedral, a stone saint offers a silent, unanswered prayer. The hall is empty, sunlight cutting through the heavy, solemn air. The sage stands before Ernston's door, finally alone with her past. She reaches for the handle, a single turn away from a painful truth. She realizes the true enemy was never the demon lord, but the one she created. Alan's words echo from centuries ago. A hero fights to protect, not for vengeance. With a heavy heart, she whispers the name of the child she failed, Ernston. She steels herself, declaring that her true battle begins now. No pressure, then. The scene shifts to a lesson on the delicate chemistry of the mind. Sano explains how stress can poison the mind, causing the illness of depression. Sano explains the illness is a cycle of overactive and underactive neurotransmitters. The sage listens as Sano lists the complex causes, from stress to genetics. But she confirms that in her world, there is an established treatment, medication. The sage realizes this medicine can normalize the very chemistry of the brain. She envies Sano's world, though Sano admits many there still refuse treatment, because of course they do. Sano's expression is one of quiet focus as she listens to the sage. The sage asks why, and Sano explains the slow, difficult path to recovery. Without medicine, all they can do is create a stress-free environment for recovery. The sage latches onto the idea, questioning what that kind of environment entails. Sano gives an example, working to improve the patient's family relationships. Sano explains that our relationships are the very environment that can make a heart sick. She insists that she is not the one who should be by Ernston's side. Sophia is. Because in this world, the sage is the only family Ernston has ever known. The sage stands alone in the hallway, the weight of that truth settling upon her. She reflects on the word family, a concept she twisted for centuries. Her mind flashes back to another time, another hero she raised, Ark. She remembers finding him and another companion outside a locked door. Ark explains that their comrade has been locked inside for 3 days straight. The other man adds that after losing 2 friends, he's on the verge of breaking down himself. Sounds like the whole party needs a therapist. But Sophia's reaction is not one of sympathy, but of cold, hard fury. She shatters the door, declaring that the hero she raised is no coward. She stands in the ruined doorway, ordering the man inside to get up. But inside, they find him not grieving, but training with a desperate fury. The sage and Ark can only watch, stunned by the sight. The man finally stops, asking if it's already morning. His companions ask if he's really been training for 3 straight days. He seems genuinely surprised, having lost all track of time. Even the sage is taken aback by his obsessive dedication. The other companion points out the state he's in, a man on the edge. The elf companion smirks, praising Ark's strength, and casually mentions he died in battle the very next week. She reflects that it wasn't just Ark. She's seen this pain in countless others. But Ark was different. He was more than a soldier. He was her family. She realizes she's still using the idea of family to perpetuate Ernston's suffering. This time she must make a different choice, for she has already met her guiding star. The door stands between her and the child she failed. She calls out Ernston's name, asking if she can hear her. Only the cold metal of the doorknob separates them now. But her question is met with a heavy, suffocating silence. From inside, Ernston listens as the sage explains she didn't come to apologize. She simply admits that she was worried, and that's why she came. The door remains a silent barrier between the two women. Inside, Ernston listens, her expression a mask of quiet sorrow. She explains that for some reason, she couldn't even get out of bed. The simple act of turning the knob felt like an impossible task. She felt utterly trapped, a prisoner in her own small room. The confusion spiraled into despair as the hours ticked by. She felt she couldn't face anyone, lost and unsure of what to do next. But then she questions that feeling, wondering if her despair is misplaced. Outside, the sage continues her vigil, waiting for any sign of life. And from the other side, a small, heartbroken apology finally breaks the silence. The sage's eyes widen as she hears Ernston's voice from within. But Ernston's words are not of anger, but of self-blame. She insists that her foster mother is not the one at fault. The sage cries out, telling Ernston she has nothing to be sorry for. But the only response is another whispered, heartbreaking apology. The sage's denial grows more frantic, her voice sharp with pain. Their words become a tragic loop of guilt and desperate reassurance. The doorknob stands as a silent symbol of their separation, and once more the only sound is Ernston's quiet, broken apology. The sage's composure finally shatters, her eyes filling with tears. The sage sinks to her knees, whispering that Ernston has it all wrong. She bows her head to the door, begging her to stop, insisting that she is the one at fault. The door remains a cold, unmoving barrier between them. A heavy silence hangs in the air, thick with centuries of regret. A memory flashes through her mind, the eyes of her fallen leader, Alan, whispering an apology. The kind smile of another lost comrade echoes the same sentiment. Even the party's cleric offers a final, sorrowful apology. The word sorry haunts her, a ghostly chorus from a war that never ended. The doorknob seems to mock her, a simple lock she cannot break. And so the sage remains, a penitent figure kneeling in a lonely hall, and then the sound of a lock turning breaks the heavy silence. The sage looks up, a sudden painful realization dawning in her eyes. For 500 years, she had forgotten the simplest truth, that people have hearts. Through her tears, Ernston asks why Sophia is the one who feels the need to apologize. The sage is stunned into silence, her own grief reflected in the girl's eyes. And then, a quiet, simple thank you echoes down the empty hall. From the shadows, Liam watches, unable to comprehend the scene before him. He admits to himself that he doesn't understand any of this at all. Guess his tough love manual didn't cover this chapter. The endless cycle of apologies had been broken by a single, unexpected act. Ernston looks at her foster mother, still asking that one simple question. Why? The sage recalls a rule. Physical contact is not recommended for clients. But in that moment, she was not a psychologist, she was simply a mother. Later, in Sano's office, the true counseling begins with a lesson on bipolar disorder. Ernston sits in silence, finally ready to confront the truth of her condition. Sano explains the cycle of mania and depression with professional calm. Ernston's voice is barely a whisper as she finally begins to speak of Kyle. She confesses that she truly believed his death had cured her, had made her strong. She felt as if Kyle was living on inside her, a source of newfound power. Sano simply listens, allowing the painful confession to fill the quiet room. But now, Ernston understands. It was all just a symptom of her illness. Ernston listens, the weight of her diagnosis finally settling in. She asks the one question that matters. Can she truly be cured? Sano explains that for chronic conditions, the goal isn't a cure but remission. But with the next expedition only 7 days away, time is not on their side. Ernston knows the truth. A full recovery would take months, even years of rest. But she can't rest, convinced that without her healing, people will die. Sano calmly suggests they can find a replacement for the mission. But Ernston insists that no one in the world can match her healing abilities. Sano's gaze sharpens, her patience meeting a wall of self-sacrificing logic. And Ernston sinks back into the darkness, trapped by her own immense power. She believes she must carry on Kyle's great work as the party's cleric. She is the hope of the people, a burden that now crushes her spirit. But Sano's eyes are sharp with focus, a new strategy already in motion. As night falls over the capital, a desperate plan is set into motion. The sage makes her way to the royal castle, intending to intervene directly. She reports that Ernston's illness is far too severe for the next mission. Kneeling before the throne, she formally requests the saint be taken off the front lines. But the king is just a boy, casually drinking as he listens to her plea. Guess child labor laws don't apply to royalty. He sets down his glass, his decision already made without a second thought. The sage can only look back in disbelief as her request is flatly denied. The sage's eye narrows, her resolve hardening against the king's casual dismissal. She clenches her fist, trying to explain that Ernston's condition is far too fragile. But the court argues that a healer of Ernston's caliber is simply irreplaceable. The sage pleads with them to at least postpone the expedition to give her time. The boy king simply asks what has changed to warrant such a desperate request. She explains that the party's duty has always been to fight, to risk everything for the kingdom. She admits that she was the one who instilled this brutal mindset in generations of heroes. And now, after centuries of bloodshed, she finally understands that she was wrong. But the king is unmoved, declaring the mission will proceed in 7 days before dismissing her. Guess I was wrong for 500 years isn't a valid excuse. The scene cuts to a forest where a massive impact shakes the trees as someone shouts in frustration. The sage explains to her companions that the king has denied their request to pull Ernston from the mission. Below, a group of adventurers struggles against a massive warrior holding tryouts for Ernston's spot. The hulking warrior Sirius scoffs at their weakness, clenching his fist in disgust. He easily dispatches an archer, unimpressed by the so-called volunteers. Elsewhere, the sage confronts Liam, who has conducted his own brutal recruitment drive. Back at the first tryout, the defeated mage can only glare from the ground, swearing he'll get his revenge. He begins to chant, calling upon a fire spirit for a desperate final attack. Sirius watches, completely unfazed, questioning if the boy truly has the will to kill. Watching from above, the swordsman with the sage asks if they should delay the expedition. But she explains that showing weakness now would only invite chaos from their enemies. The swordsman admits he had some hope for the volunteers, but Sirius stands over the defeated, calling them pathetic compared to the knights. Liam warns the hulking warrior that he's said far too much. The swordsman explains these volunteers don't grasp the true threat they face. Sirius scoffs, declaring that finding a replacement for Ernston is impossible. But the bird-masked companion reminds him that true masters hide their strength. The sage listens, absorbing every word of the tense debate. The two warriors face off, their philosophies clashing in the quiet forest. Sirius declares they'll just have to find someone even stronger than the original party. Simple, right? The companion listens, his expression hidden behind his strange mask. The bird-masked companion questions Liam, surprised he's not siding with the kingdom. Liam's gaze is distant, his thoughts turning inward for the first time. Sano's words echo in his mind, challenging him to see if pain truly made Ernston stronger. He remembers the scene at the cathedral, a moment of raw emotion he couldn't understand. He scoffs, trying to push the doubt away, but the image is burned into his memory. Sirius scoffs at the idea, asking how they can trust their lives to someone so broken. The bird-masked companion watches the debate unfold, her expression unreadable. The sage observes that even Liam is showing a rare flicker of emotion today. On the ground, the defeated mage is left to grapple with his own weakness, so much for being a prodigy. He watches them leave, realizing the gap between him and the hero's party is impossibly wide. Liam suggests they head to the Adventurers Guild to find top-tier talent. The four of them set out, determined to find 2 replacements so Ernston can finally rest. Their destination is the legendary Adventurers Guild, a place of heroes and mercenaries. Inside, the Grand Hall is a hub for adventurers of all ranks from 1 to 8. But first-class adventurers are a rare breed, with only 100 in the entire kingdom. A grumpy dwarf at the bar makes it clear he's not interested in any job offers. But the news is already spreading. The hero's party is looking for a replacement for Kyle. A woman with snake-like horns dismisses the rumor, noting Kyle was an archer, not a warrior. Meanwhile, Sirius approaches a small elf, telling her she's the one they should be looking for. He argues that since Kyle was a rearguard, any competent mage should be able to fill the role. Easy peasy. The small elf scoffs, asking if he really expects a master like Medusa to play hero. Another adventurer agrees, stating their clan leader would never become a dog for the kingdom. The woman in question, the legendary mage Medusa, questions Sirius's childish request. He insists she's strong enough, but she reminds him the hero's party actually killed a dark general. She looks down on him with a smirk, asking if he's frustrated by their success. Elsewhere, adventurers discuss the legends, noting only old men claim to have seen the dark generals. One man even suggests a shocking theory, that the demon lord and his generals don't exist at all. Sirius desperately refutes this, asking Medusa what the heroes have been fighting for 500 years. Her answer is simple and cold. They've been losing because the demon tribe is just that strong. But a bartender reveals the true conspiracy. The demon lord is a lie, a story to control the people. Sirius scoffs at the bartender's theory, questioning his belief in childish fairy tales. Medusa adds that if the sage were truly powerful, she'd fight herself instead of looking for help. She dismisses their entire struggle as a cruel, pointless story. From the shadows, a mysterious woman watches the scene with keen interest. But Liam cuts through the noise, stating that whatever the truth, Kyle fought and died. As they approach Medusa's table, Sirius remarks on how rare it is to see a sage in a place like this. The hulking warrior seems completely lost in the web of conspiracies. The mysterious woman's gaze sharpens, taking in every detail. Other adventurers whisper that the sage's legendary image is hard to live up to. The woman observes that the saint is missing, and they're here to find a replacement for her. The small elf notes that the guild is a poor recruiting ground, as the truly strong avoid this war. Medusa's gaze is sharp, her expression a mask of condescending amusement. Her companion asks if she's even listening to the party's desperate plea. It's revealed that Medusa has already been approached by the hero's party and refused them once before. The elf admits they never knew the true reason for her deep-seated distrust. Medusa explains that it's impossible to trust them now that the real ones like Kyle and Ernston are gone. The narrative introduces the kingdom's strongest sage, a master who never steps onto the battlefield. Then there's the hero of unknown origin, chosen by a divine oracle for a seemingly impossible task, and a former top-tier mercenary, expelled from the guild for continuing to hunt demons. Finally, the mysterious woman is revealed as Medusa's only student, a dropout from the Magic Academy. Medusa looks down on them with a condescending smile, calling the hero's party a circus. But the mysterious woman simply addresses her as teacher, her expression unreadable. The swordsman is surprised to learn of their connection, while Liam just wants to move on. Medusa simply smirks, clearly enjoying the sage's apparent desperation. Her student reveals that Saraphina was the one who approached her, calling it a mistake. She explains that since Saraphina can't use any attack magic, they need a rear guard. The entire guild murmurs in shock at this unexpected revelation. Even Medusa is stunned, calling a mage with no offensive spells completely unheard of. The student admits that this unique limitation is precisely why she was forced to drop out. As they leave, Liam dismisses her, but the swordsman argues she's their only option. Guess beggars can't be choosers. The dwarf clicks his tongue, his disgust for the party now clear. He mutters that this pathetic display is their true, unpleasant nature. Medusa coldly tells them to take their personal prostitute and leave. The cruel insult lands, and Saraphina's expression falls into shadow. Liam turns back, ready for a fight, but the swordsman holds him back. The swordsman tries to de-escalate, admitting their skepticism is understandable. But he makes it clear that some lines should not be crossed. He draws his blade, declaring that even a dog of the kingdom won't tolerate insults to a comrade. Looks like diplomacy has a sharp edge. The entire guild erupts into chaos as the swordsman prepares to fight. Medusa's companion warns her to make the student apologize because this is about to get bloody. Medusa just smirks, questioning if he'll really interfere in a simple tavern brawl. But the swordsman tells Liam to stand down, declaring his holy sword can cut through any barrier. Medusa's companions accept the challenge, boasting their fists can shatter his defenses just as easily. A barrier of pure energy forms, a testament to their combined power. The holy sword slams into their defense, sending cracks of energy across its surface. The grumpy dwarf can only stare, his cynicism momentarily forgotten. The four adventurers combine their strength, barely holding back the swordsman's single devastating strike. The entire guild is frozen in shock, unable to process the power on display. One of Medusa's companions looks on in utter disbelief, his confidence shattered. He realizes their combined barrier was nearly broken by one man. Guess the dogs of the kingdom have some bite after all. The swordsman questions why he's being stopped, stating Saraphina was the one insulted. Medusa clarifies that Saraphina was indeed the target, much to the girl's confusion. But she then asks why that's an insult, as her companions finally recognize their opponent. She argues that being a prostitute is a respectable job, though she isn't one herself. The swordsman is left completely speechless, his righteous fury deflating in an instant. He sheathes his blade, apologizing for his rudeness and asking to be let go. Medusa's companion scoffs, asking if he's just going to run away from the fight. The swordsman simply replies that it's a common accusation for him. Guess he makes a habit of this. Medusa continues her verbal assault, asking if Saraphina seduced her way into the party. She then leans into her companion, whispering that she wouldn't mind him joining her side. Medusa's companions are stunned by her brazen attempt to recruit their opponent. Sirius can't believe his ears, demanding to know if she's actually serious. But Medusa just plays innocent, feigning confusion at his outrage. The swordsman is rendered completely silent by the bizarre turn of events. The sage wonders if she's made another mistake, but Sirius dismisses the point entirely. Liam explodes at the insinuation, while the swordsman notes he's almost reasonable around Saraphina. Even Medusa's own companion admits that her words were out of line. With their recruitment mission a total failure, the party takes their leave. Back at their base, Sirius fumes, calling the hero's party a bunch of useless fools. But another companion turns to Medusa, questioning her own actions during the confrontation. Back at the guild, the grumpy dwarf reveals he saw it all with his own eyes. He confirms the truth that so many deny: the four dark generals are real. Medusa explains her harshness, warning her companions not to be so cruel. She believes the kingdom needs a sacrifice, a reckless party to die for the people's dreams. The story flashes back to Kyle's final moments, trapped behind a massive barrier. Medusa's voice cuts through Ernston's panic, stating that healing is useless on the dead. She forces the saint to face the cold, hard truth. Kyle is already gone. Ernston shatters, her denial erupting into a desperate, heartbroken scream. Medusa's expression is cold, a silent witness to the saint's complete breakdown. Back in the present, her companions discuss their next move, realizing healers are impossibly rare. Medusa dismisses the knights as useless, asking what they'll do for a rear guard. Her small elf companion listens intently, her expression unreadable. The group stands on the ramparts, the question of Saraphina hanging in the air. Medusa quietly wonders if Ernston would be well if she herself were more normal. The swordsman and the elf listen, confused by her sudden introspection. The bird-masked companion tells Saraphina not to take Medusa's words to heart. But the swordsman's gaze is heavy with unspoken thoughts. He's lost in a spiral of what-ifs, imagining a world where their weaknesses were strengths. His thoughts land on the one choice he can't take back, inviting Kyle to join them. But he shakes it off, declaring that regret won't kill the demon lord. Spoken like a true hero, a flashback reveals the source of his pain, the accusation that their weakness killed Kyle. The swordsman Alfred agrees with this brutal assessment, but Sirius tells him to be quiet. The memory continues, showing the aftermath of a brutal training session. Sirius simply scoffs, his harsh philosophy completely unshaken. But Saraphina offers a different view, telling Alfred she doesn't curse the past. She recalls going to see the knights just the other day, looking for recruits, and on her way back she happened to run into Ernston in the city square. Ernston greets her with that same serene, unsettling smile. You know, the one that screams, "I'm fine," while the world burns. Saraphina can only offer a quiet reply, her own expression somber. Ernston explains she was supposed to train with Liam, but the sage sent her home instead. Saraphina continues her story, her gaze heavy with the memory. She confesses that to her, Ernston's smiling face and crying face look exactly the same. Ernston had just stood there, offering that same empty, placid expression. As they prepared to part ways, Saraphina tried to offer some kind of hope. She promised that she would be the one to find a replacement for Kyle. She pleaded with Ernston, insisting this would be the key to her recovery. Then she blurted out a strange reason, because Ernston has a thing for archers. But the saint simply turned and walked away without another word. Seraphina's eyes widen, a chilling realization dawning on her. She can only stare after her, wondering if Ernston truly meant what she said. Saraphina confesses that she's never been able to understand people's feelings. She explains that no matter how hard she tries, she can't use attack magic. She doesn't curse her past, but she is convinced that she herself is cursed. The bird-masked companion reflects that this curse is simply her innate nature. The story flashes back 6 months to Seraphina's first counseling session with Seino. She had come seeking a cure, asking if Seino was the one who could fix her illness. Seino calmly stirs her drink, acknowledging that she was often called teacher in her world. Seraphina then asks a simple question. What exactly are the symptoms of her condition? The bird-masked companion recalls seeing Seraphina's unique trait as a pathological contradiction. The sound of her footsteps echoes, a lonely rhythm in a silent world. The flashback continues, showing how Seino first found Seraphina in a library. She was an apprentice librarian, expelled from the academy but a master of all defensive magic. Seraphina explained her problem, her complete inability to learn any offensive spells. Seino mused that some people are simply built differently, excelling in one area while lacking in another. She observed Seraphina's nervous tics, her inability to make eye contact. Seino concluded that Seraphina's true talent wasn't magic, but her ability to attract men, a harsh but accurate diagnosis. But then she softened, telling Seraphina that her clothes suited her well. The simple compliment catches Seraphina completely off guard. She leaps to her feet, flustered but overjoyed, offering to give Seino a dress. In that moment, a bond was formed, built on a foundation of simple acceptance. Seraphina smiles, but points out that her clothes probably wouldn't fit Seino's different frame. Just then, Medusa leans in, calling Seino's petite build cute, much to Seino's awkward surprise. The memory shows Medusa flying off on her broom, leaving Seino to watch from the window. The bird-masked companion recalls standing by Seraphina's side, a silent observer to her unique nature. Seino's diagnosis is revealed: autism spectrum disorder, a condition marked by intense focus and social difficulties. The companion realizes Seraphina's traits match perfectly and asks the inevitable question, is there a cure? But Seino explains it's not an illness to be cured, but a trait to be understood and managed. The companion asks why being a defensive specialist is so bad, but Seraphina insists it's a liability in war. She then furiously denies the rumors that Seraphina seduced her way into the party. So much for professional detachment. The narrative explains that men were simply drawn to Seraphina, earning her the scorn of others. The bird-masked companion asks if Seino dislikes women, recalling their own awkward first meeting. Seraphina herself feels this rejection, believing that even her own teacher, Medusa, dislikes her. Seino listens, her gaze steady and analytical. The companion presses on, trying to understand Seino's unique perspective. Seino recalls being called a short raccoon dog, an insult that most people would find offensive. But she simply says that she didn't mind the comment at all. She smiles, realizing the companion's true intention was simply to become friends. The companion reflects on how a lifetime of being misunderstood could make someone fear all social contact. This cognitive distortion was reinforced by men who only valued her beauty, deepening her insecurity about her magic. The companion realizes Seraphina's desire for friendship is pure, which may be why she's never taught her to attack. Seraphina's notes reveal a painful self-awareness of her own social struggles. The companion theorizes her defensive magic is a reflection of her desire to keep others away. The observation hits a little too close to home, leaving Seraphina stunned. The companion notes that even her ability to fly is just a basic defensive spell. Seraphina struggles to process this new perspective on her own abilities. Seino explains that flying is just another way to create distance, a magic of rejection. The bird-masked companion listens, her own understanding of Seraphina deepening. She admits that while it sounds like fantasy, the theory makes a disturbing amount of sense. She asks if learning hostility could unlock offensive magic, a very healthy suggestion. Seino suggests applying cognitive therapy, just as she did for Ernston turning to the sage. But Seino firmly states that mind control is not part of her job description. The bird-masked companion listens, her own perspective on the matter clear. She argues that Seraphina's inability to harm others is a strength to be respected. Seino agrees, explaining her goal is to ease Seraphina's pain, not erase her nature. But the companion insists that learning to attack is a matter of survival. Seino refuses, declaring she'll walk away if they try to teach Seraphina hostility. The companion's gaze is sharp, weighing this unexpected ultimatum. She finally concedes, agreeing not to press the issue any further. She realizes that Sano sees Saraphina's true nature more clearly than anyone. The real source of Saraphina's pain isn't her magic, but her struggle to connect with people. Sirius scoffs, his patience completely worn thin by their failure. He calls them all pathetic, peace-loving fools who don't understand the stakes. He declares he's heading to the Knights' barracks, leaving the cathedral to them. Alfred wonders what's gotten into him, suggesting they proceed to the cathedral. The sage recalls Sano's advice, to learn from what you don't understand. Sano's voice echoes, urging her to focus on what she can do, not what she can't. The words resonate with Saraphina, who wonders what she is truly capable of. She lowers her head, lost in a moment of quiet, personal reflection. And so she walks alone through the city, a solitary figure on a new path.